I want to tell you a story. 6 years ago, in August of 2014, police officer Darren Wilson shot and killed Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. In 2014, I wasn't a minister yet. I was just one of those standard Unitarian Universalists, and I was also a marketing and innovation consultant. Karen and I were at friend's house for the weekend, and the TV was on for most of it. We were watching the coverage of what was happening in Ferguson, the protests, the fires, the looting, and I got more exposure to the term Black Lives Matter. I had first heard about it because the term came up when Trayvon Martin was shot just 14 miles north of where we lived in Orlando, Florida. I want to be honest about what I thought when I saw on the TV, because you all might be able to relate to it. I couldn't figure out why people were destroying things in their own city and lighting them on fire. I was looking for the logic in that, and we'll get to that. And as a marketing consultant who worked with companies on their messaging, I really wanted to help them with that Black Lives Matter message. Like, is that the best way to get the message across? Is that going to help people whose minds need to change to understand? Wasn't it maybe a little bit too provocative? I mean, is that really what you're going to go with? And I even went down like, oh, I could market test it. I could do focus groups on it. I could do some consumer work on it because that's where my brain was. It made me uncomfortable. And after all, weren't they trying to convince people like me? So does that sound familiar to any of you? As Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. So here we are 6 years later, and after George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis this summer, and I heard the term defund the police. And I felt some of those similar sentiments come back. I paused, and I know better, and I'm trying to do better. I'm understanding that it is not my place as a privileged white person to try to reason with logic of the actions of people who are so angry, so discouraged, so fearful, so fed up, and to tell them how to react. It is not a logical situation. And the minute that I start having thoughts of property being more important than human life, I have to stop myself. I've learned and understood that activist slogans are not corporate advertising campaigns. They are visionary, they are bold, they are provocative. They are often born out of fast responses to tragedy, like the death of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown. It is also not my job to judge the appropriateness or acceptability of activist slogans. In fact, it is actually an act of white supremacy. Who am I to tell them to tone it down so that it is more acceptable to people like me? Am I really the center of the universe? The answer is no, I'm not. Who am I to say that it's too bold and that it may turn people off? And really, isn't it kind of audacious to think that I get a say in it anyway? That I am the target for the message? Isn't it a sign that I expect the whole world to revolve around me? Isn't that just so white privilege of me? And isn't my own discomfort with it a sign of my own white fragility? So I knew better, so I did better. I noted my discomfort with it and I went, I don't even know what it means. So I went, I did my research. What did those who supported defund the police mean by it? What did it mean to them? What were journalists saying, and what were the activists saying, and what is the history behind it, and what is the vision of it? And if I'm uncomfortable, then I'm also turning my vision towards me, not them. So how do we handle that? 6 years ago, I was uncomfortable with Black Lives Matter. And now I wear a Black Lives Matter bracelet every single day. I've got a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, and I even got a Black Lives Matter mask. So who changed exactly? Them or me? I know some of you are in this similar place with Defund the Police because some of you have shared it with me. And I'm assuming there's a whole bunch of others of you who are wondering as well. And I am not going to tell you whether you should agree with it or not. That is not, first of all, you wouldn't believe me or do it even if I did tell you. But I really want us to wrestle with it together. We're going to unpack it a little bit. We're going to talk about why it's relevant to our UU values. For some of you, this discussion may go further than where you're comfortable. And for others, it may not go far enough. And I'm okay with that. This is important enough for us to wrestle with. And it's really important for us at UUCP to wrestle with it because we are a congregation that has embraced and struggled with police officers. A big part of our history is Nick Erfley and his family, who were members of this congregation. And Nick was killed in the line of duty in 2007 and died at the age of 33. Right here in this sanctuary where I'm standing, we held his wake and supported his family and understood at a personal level the danger and risks of this job. I know in our congregation we have retired and active duty law enforcement officers in our congregation right now. And we are a people who value civic service and helping people in our community. This congregation is also one that has struggled with the police. We've struggled with having them on our campus. We've wrestled in our safety conversations of when we should call them, when we should not. And as a country, we have been mourning oh so many who have died. This summer, it was George Floyd, it was Jacob Blake from Kenosha, Wisconsin. And this week we learned of the death of Daniel Prude, who was killed in Rochester, someone who had mental health and substance abuse issues and died unnecessarily. And we know the officers who barged into Breonna Taylor's home and killed her have still not been charged in Louisville. Honestly, I get kind of tired of the conversations about good cops and bad cops because it is just not that simple. Yes, there are people in every profession who aren't trained or have discipline issues, some that are really great and some who aren't, but we are all human beings. And looking at people on a binary and putting them into the good or bad category just leaves all of it lacking. And we cannot blame this whole problem on a few bad seeds. That's just not how it works. Instead, we need to look at the entire system, the whole process. It's who is recruited, how are they trained, what is valued and not valued, the culture, and how that spills over into our streets. Now, I know you. We are complex beings, and we can hold multiple truths. We can hold that valuable human beings hold these jobs and that the job can be dangerous. And we learned after Vietnam as a country that we can decry war, but still support soldiers returning from war. We learned a hard lesson after Vietnam when we said the war is unjust and we don't believe it, and we treated veterans as dispensable. We learned that we could hold the sacrifices and the job of soldiers in one hand and fight against war in the other. Why can't we do that with police officers? And we need to hold that and. We need to hold that the history of policing is problematic at best. The first police force, official one, in the US was in Boston in 1838, and it was put in place to protect shipping and commercial property, for property. But in the South, it was a totally different economic system based on preserving the slavery system. There were policing forces in the South for 150 years before Boston, tasked with chasing down runaways and preventing slave revolts. And after the Civil War, the local sheriffs, remember the sheriffs, Andy Griffith, they functioned similar to the slave patrols, especially down in the South, enforcing segregation and keeping freed slaves from voting rights. Those sheriffs turned into police departments and an entire system. We know that anti-Black oppression is in the DNA of this system. We can't just make a few tweaks and then say, oh, we fixed it. And that's actually where defund the police came from. And I think some of the challenge that some people have is that they think it means totally unfund or disband the police. And I'll be honest, there are some people who wish that to be true. But I believe that there are also a number that are saying, how can we take the funds that are going towards the police and reappropriate them so that the right people with the right skills do the right job? Police training covers a lot, but there's a big focus on weaponry and a militarization mindset that goes at odds with helping people. The serve and protect, the serve part has been missing, and it's missing even more now that we've got police going up against protesters, turning peaceful situations into very dangerous ones where people are getting killed. So let's talk a little bit about Daniel Prude in Rochester. The day of his death, Daniel was talking about suicide, acting suicidal. He also had PCP in his system. His family was very worried about his erratic behavior, and so they called the police, and the police took him to the hospital. He was there for only a few hours and was discharged, and he was put in a taxi and sent back home. He was still suicidal, and he was still erratic, and his family did not know what to do. He had already thrown himself down the stairs, and they called the police again when he had left the house, and they thought that he was going to jump off of a bridge. So they called the police. The police ended up putting a spit sock over his head, and Daniel suffocated from that. In restraining him, they killed him. Now, I'm not saying that Daniel Prude wasn't a challenge. It sounds like he was very distressed and he was aggressive, but he was suicidal and on drugs. Did he have to die from that? What defund the police means is that we can take funds from what we're spending on police and put them in less militarized, less violent ways to help people. So imagine this. Imagine if Daniel's brother called 911 and said he's suicidal and he's on PCP, he's acting very erratic. And the 911 agent sent out a suicide prevention social worker and somebody who had expertise in working with people with drugs. What if they had the tools to de-escalate the situation, not using a mask that would suffocate him, to deal with the situation that they had to work with his mental health situation? What if Daniel had never come back from the hospital after a few hours, but actually got the treatment that he needed when he was in the hospital? It is not hard to imagine several different paths where Daniel could have received the help he needed rather than being dead. What Defund the Police is asking us to do is to think imaginatively about how we could care for each other. And it is also saying that it is too late to have small incremental changes. So what does it look like? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was asked this, and this is what she said. The good news is that it actually doesn't take a lot of imagination. It looks like a suburb. Affluent white communities already live in a world where they choose to fund youth, health, housing, etc., more than they fund police. These communities have lower crime rates, not because they have more police, but because they have more resources to support healthy society in a way that reduces crime. When a teenager or preteen does something harmful in a suburb, I say teen because this is often where the lifelong carceral cycles begin for Black and brown communities. Then white communities bend over backwards to find alternatives to incarceration for their loved ones to protect their future, like community service or rehab or restorative measures. Why don't we treat Black and brown people the same way? Why doesn't the criminal system care about Black teens' futures the way they care about white teens' futures? Why doesn't the news use Black people's graduation or family photos in stories the way they do when they cover white people, like Brock Turner, who commit harmful crimes? Affluent suburbs, white suburbs, also design their own lives so they walk through the world without having much interruption or interaction with police at all, aside from community events and speeding tickets. And many of these communities try to reduce those too. Just starting there would be a dramatically and radically different world than what we are experiencing now. End quote. I think the place that we're in the summer of 2020 is that we are done with this. We are done with the deaths. We don't want one single more. No more people dying. So we have to ask what we are willing to sacrifice to make this happen. And we should all reconcile with who we mean when we say we need to be willing to be uncomfortable with not knowing exactly what this looks like. We're waiting for the master plan from the Defund the Police folks, and that's not what they're giving us. They're giving us a vision, a call for action. Are we willing to not have our privilege protected? How upset are we really by all these deaths? Is it enough to risk change? So here's the thing, change doesn't happen by visionaries saying, well, first we're going to take this tiny step, and then maybe we'll take this tiny step, and the budget, and here's all of the elements that will happen, and here's how hard it will be. And then those losing power are going, oh, that's a great plan. We're totally on board. It has never worked that way. Change happens by someone standing up and saying, I have a dream. And enough people who believe in that dream as well are also willing to stand up for it. And then those who have heard the mandate to figure out how to do it, well, we're at that vision stage. We're actually way past that stage. We're at the stand up and say this is not okay stage. We're at the not one more, and we'll remember each one stage. Does it mean taking funds from the existing system and giving it to community resources that aren't as rooted in anti-Black oppression and weaponization and militarization? I don't know, but I'm not closing off any routes. And I am listening very carefully to the visionaries who are sharing with me their ideas for a path forward. This is really unique space for Unitarian Universalists, and this is why it's relevant. We are the visionaries. We are the ones who believe in collective liberation. We are the ones who don't believe in a manual or a Bible to tell us what to believe. We are willing to live with questions and wrestle with them and believe in a better future for everyone. And isn't that what this calls for? We know that we are appalled by these killings. We lament the death of every single one. And we know the system needs to change. But our anger is not enough. We need to push forward with the vision or support the people who have one. I encourage you to wrestle with this, to dig further and support those who are fighting for the change. So might it be.